welcome you to the show. It's Al Sparks Mornings, Mega Worldwide. Don't forget to like, subscribe, give a thumbs up, support the show. Also, I'm wearing my NASA jacket in honor of our first guest on the show this morning. Our dear friend and cohort for quite some time. Let me see if I can bring the screen up properly. Carl Alessi, good to see you. Hi.
Hi, nice to be seen.
Yes, it's lovely. I got to be honest. I prefer to see you over dinner at a restaurant near Flappers. I feel like that's our. We're gonna get back to our regular, hopefully very soon. My next Flappers gig will be in the end of February, due to family medical stuff that I have to be around for, and serve as nurse and cohort for in January. So it's the long story. Everybody's fine. So okay, it's gonna be all right, but it's gonna be a work. So, but the last one in February, I'm starting this year. By the way, all of the shows at Flappers will be specials. I'm treating them as specials. The series is called Unrepeatable. Every show brand new, no notes, no net, just comedy. And for all these guys who slave over 7 minutes and are like, God, it takes me a year to come up with something. I'm here to show those youngins that there's more to life than fixating on your shoes while you're walking around a stage going, what else do I want to talk about? That is something you will never see at a show like mine. In honor of the greats, Jonathan Winters, Robin Williams, I will bring an hour of comedy fresh off the top of my dome. There will be a theme this year for each one that I will come up with the week before, just because of the trend of what I'm talking about. So there'll be something to look for, and I'll drop that the weekend before the show, so people can know what to semi expect, but don't expect me to be tied to that because I will not put anchors on my brain. That said, I look forward to our dinner that we will invariably have at least at one of these with you and your lovely wife and anybody else in the Sparklers fandom that comes out for the show and wants to join us at Barney's or Yard House or whatever the walking distance restaurant we have. One of these days we'll go all the way around the block to Fuddruckers just so I can tell high school stories because that was my go-to restaurant of choice. It was Fuddruckers, Homer's, or if we really went for it, we'd go down to like to downtown to either one of the deep dish pizza places or or something like that. But the two were Homer's and Fuddruckers were our two rotating bests. Carl, I we're about to go to the moon, sort of.
Yeah,
And
for
I have,
sure.
yeah, and just so people if you want to know what was on television at my house over the last little bit, and I got to fix that on the stream for our dear friends at on where is it? There we go. The Mac OS screen. We'll figure this part of it out. If you want to see what was on television at our houses, invariably, it was this thing, this giant, whatever 5-story building, being bussed to its takeoff spot over, and it took an entire day and a half. How fast was it going? A mile an hour?
About a mile an hour when you've got everything loaded up on the crawler transporter like that.
Yeah, we wanted desperately at our house to be able to watch the whole thing, just kind of have it on all day while we were working and doing stuff, Summer and I. The problem was invariably was that there are birds flying around it. You'll see one there, right there, that one right there. And Bucky decided that it was his job to police the birds that were in the house. So he was scratching the TV screen trying to attack the birds that were flying around the ship. Tell me what you know about this ship, and then I'll have my own 2 cents about this and catch everybody up on what this mission will be.
All right. Well, let's see. The official name for it is Artemis II. Obviously, having followed Artemis I, which was an unmanned flight
Mm-hmm.
a couple of years back. Artemis II is going to take 4 astronauts hopefully in early February. That's the first launch window. Out to do a couple of records. One of the first records they're going to set initially is that they're going to go into a high Earth orbit, which will have a higher altitude than any other mission since Gemini 11 back in 1966. And then from there, they're going to depart towards the moon. They're going to go
Mhm.
around the backside of the moon, again,
Look
setting
out.
a record there because they'll be the farthest
Mhm.
away from Earth that any set of human beings have ever been since Apollo 13, ironically. They were the farthest up until this flight.
Mhm.
So they're going to lap around the back of the moon. They're going to come back on what's called a free return trajectory. They will not go into orbit there. Then they're going to come back and they're going to re enter and splash down not far from here off the coast of San Diego.
And this is basically just a proof of concept almost for the entire mission, because the next time, they'll go into orbit, and then the one after that they'll land. Is this the
Well,
theory?
actually, supposedly next time around, they're going to do both those things.
Mm.
Supposedly, they're going to go into orbit and they are going to actually land.
Hmm.
Not that we have a lander ready to go yet, and we haven't
Right.
decided on one definitively yet.
Hmm.
So that's pretty ambitious, to put it mildly, but that's supposed to be the plan.
So here's my plan. Here's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. This would be for what they should do. We've talked about a space elevator on Earth at some point, either set in the Nevada desert or something like that, with a giant cable that basically goes to space, and everybody promises to fly around it, and not crash their 747 into it. But that it would go all the way to space, and that you would be able to lift stuff to space and back again without the need for a launch, or at least for components and parts, stuff that still needs to be assembled on Earth. I feel like with the lack of atmosphere and the light gravity, this is actually a closer technology that would work on the moon in terms of orbiting, getting stuff to the surface and back again. Like,
It could be, yeah. I mean, they've talked about magnetic rail guns that can be used to get things into orbit, for instance, from the lunar surface. It's only 1.6G. But for now, everybody's got their horses tethered to ballistic missiles, to rockets
mhm,
that'll get you to and from wherever you want to go. And when it comes to getting where you want to go in terms of landing on the moon, you're using a rocket to do that because there's no air. So you can't use aero braking or parachutes or anything like that at all. You've
right.
got to fly yourself all the way down with propulsion the entire time. Otherwise, you end up crashing and you end up becoming a footnote in history
That's right.
in
And
pieces.
for those you don't know, our Carl is the one who brought us to our attention Searching for Skylab, which is a fascinating documentary at searchingforskylab.com, just in case you want to check that out and um, get your nerd on in terms of space stuff, which I often like to do. For those that don't know, Summer, my girlfriend, grew up in Clearwater, Florida, and went to space camp when she was a kid. One of her dreams was to be an astronaut. So we're a very NASA friendly household. We talk about this kind of stuff all the time, and I find it unfortunate, ever so slightly unfortunate, that that this is happening kind of like the 250th during this particular White House. You know what I mean? It's kind of a bummer that that'll be on their mark. But a lot of I chalk it up to like what Neil Armstrong said, that fate decided that he would be the first man on the moon, not him or his greatness or anything. Which I mean, I think he sells himself a little bit short, but I do believe that he meant it when he was like, it was a million different variables, a billion different variables, a trillion different variables that put him in that spot to be the guy at that moment that have
Hmm.
very little to do with him. And so I,
Yep.
I really want us to remind ourselves like what everyone's been through in the celebration of these achievements, that they have very little to do in a lot of ways with the people who are on deck at the time, the especially the government, as long as they don't shut it down. And I find there's been an irony around the Trump administration, being effectively as Republicans are famously anti NASA, anti space exploration. Now, I think there are parallel tracks for why that is. Some of them are budget hawks, and share something with, I would guess, the fringe of our side, which is like, if there's a hungry person on Earth, why are we spending any money on space travel? That would be the thing. Never mind the technologies that have saved lives that have come from it. They always blow past that, but they're budget hawks about it. There's limited resources. Why are we spending any resources doing it? I think there's also a big chunk of the right wing Republicans who believe that the Earth is covered in a firmament and that we live underneath a giant cake cloche with the sky painted on it because that's the way the Lord wants it. And NASA's just either a big fraud or they're afraid at one point that the Challenger blew up not because of a fault in the heat shield, but because it bounced off the firmament and smashed into the sky, which is an immovable force. So it's ironic that the Republican president is around when this stuff is going through. And a lot of it has to do with sort of the technological advancements that are necessary in our modern life, that satellites, that both near Earth orbit satellites or low Earth orbit satellites like Starlink and the like, or big spy satellites and Space Force require you to be in orbit around the Earth. It requires the technology to have a functional space station and the like. So I feel like this is, if you want to talk about a movable object, space is part of man's yearning, and we're just going to keep at it. Somebody is, no matter who, right?
Yeah,
us.
and
Yeah, go ahead.
exactly. It is part of that, and we can talk quite a bit about the spin-off technologies that we get from space, and justifiably so. But in the end, it's that thing that John Kennedy enunciated back in 1961, where he was talking about um, Edmund Hillary, and why did he want to climb, or Mallory, I think, was the one who died on Everest, right. And he said, because it is there.
Mm-hmm,
Well,
right.
space is there, and
right.
we're going to climb it, and the moon and the planets are there, and new hopes for knowledge and peace are there. So that's the reason. It's aspirational.
We choose to do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Right.
Hard, right? That's my father's accent from
right.
Boston.
Right. I feel like we should have Boston Brian come on and do the kind of like street level version of that,
Yeah, there you go. Every time I hear him, I hear my dad.
Exactly. So
yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, on the issue of Republicans and budgeting and so forth, there's some good news on all of that. The Trump administration wanted to cut NASA science by 48%, which are catastrophic cuts. But those cuts for NASA's budget, in particular in the science areas, were reversed by both the Republican House and the Republican Senate. They've discarded those, thrown those out, and reversed all those in their submitted budget that has to go back to who in order to become law. So that's really good news.
Yeah.
One of the sad things about that, though, is that one science mission that at this point effectively is canceled is a Mars sample return mission, where we've had these samples collected and dropped off for pickup later. The idea was that we would end up having another rover that would go in and collect them, put them on a Mars ascent vehicle, and we would eventually get them back to Earth. Well, it may be that the Chinese that get around to doing that before we do.
Right.
We hope they don't get to land on the moon before we do again, which at least bothers me a lot, and didn't seem to bother a lot of other people when I was putting up articles about it on Facebook. And they're just saying things like, well, what do we want to land on the moon for? Why did we risk human lives doing that? Who cares if the Chinese get there first? What does it matter? I think it matters. I think if you found out that the Chinese got back there first before us, it would be just one more huge right cross against the chin for us in terms of national prestige. And it would be phenomenally embarrassing on top of all the other embarrassments we've self-inflicted in the last year. So, yeah, I want to get us back there before the Chinese do, and I want to make it a sustainable presence when we do get back.
Well, especially because the Chinese missions so far have been to bomb it. There was that explosion on the surface of the moon, and a lot of people believe that was an actual testing of ground by the Chinese. A lot of their stuff, by the way, has been highly elevated. I think there's a lot. First of all, do you, Carl Alessi, have a favorite space movie? Like that's not real. That's not Apollo 13 or something like that.
And not a doc or something.
Yeah.
Probably you got to fall back on the old greatest hit of 2001. You really do.
Well,
it's just such a phenomenal film for its time in particular, but still so much of it stands up, and it's just a tremendous movie to behold, especially on 4K if you happen to have that in your home.
Yes. And but that's a big meal for a lot of people or whatever. Did you? I don't know that you and I've ever had a chance to talk, at least in public, about The Martian and the fact, and how they handled that as well, which I thought they did a pretty good job of keeping true to most of the science of it, um,
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, even
without the
Andy
Wally
Weir, who
ending.
wrote the novel,
Right.
will tell you the whole inciting incident in that, where you have this massive dust storm that starts ripping everything apart, so they have to strand um, somebody from their crew on the Martian surface alone. That's not really possible because the density of the atmosphere on Mars is so tiny that you can't generate that much mass moving in terms of wind and sand and
Mm-hmm.
regolith and all this other stuff that it would blow anything apart. He goes, I admit that, but I needed some way to strand him.
Right.
So that's
Right.
the way we wrote it.
Yeah. I
And there
mean,
are some other things.
I had
Go
thought
ahead.
I had thought that a simple meteor strike would have been enough because of the lack of atmosphere, because the concussive hit, if it was nearby, by hook or by crook, if something had struck, we're tracking an asteroid and blah blah blah, and it like the timing of it is such blah blah blah, and that in and of itself could have caused a concussive blast that could have been their reason for evacuating and all that kind of stuff. But you couldn't do it again, which is what destroyed his crops and the like, because he was having to seal the area, and you had to have his seal look really dangerous because he basically duct taped the ship back together.
Yeah.
Although I think it's fascinating in that light atmosphere where he was able to just kind of that they were just strapping plastic over stuff because of the lack of atmosphere. I loved it just because of the focus on the science, in solving the problems, even if the problems
Mhm.
themselves, the impetus for them wasn't scientific. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's about human ingenuity and struggle and the ability to survive and work out problems one at a time as they come up, which is really kind of an underlying theme in spaceflight when you look at it. Whether you're getting ready for a mission, designing a spacecraft, confronting an emergency, figuring out what went wrong, even if it's something catastrophic like Challenger, which you were mentioning earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and all of that. So that's that's the theme of that film is how do you solve problems in terms of your intellect, in terms of your character, how
Mm-hmm.
you take them one at a time, how you don't panic, or as Fred Hayes, who is the lunar module pilot on Apollo 13, said, never panic early, which is the name of his biography that he
Mm-hmm.
has out.
Don't
That's a
comply in
strong theme in
advance.
it.
It's like there's a lot of parallels to don't comply in advance. Don't allow the stress, the potential stress of a situation, to take over your mindset while you're engaged in something. You can plan for strategic or tactical failures, but you cannot worry about them. I've always said, and this is Sparksism, but that worry is weaponized imagination. You have the power of your imagination. Yes, you can imagine all these outcomes, but once you start to ruminate or worry on them, you add stress, which takes your mental capacity away from dealing with the things that are right in front of you, and also it's physically bad for you and a myriad of other reasons. The I guess the big question, with whether Jared Isaacson was going to get confirmed or not was like a test for this administration as to whether they were going to take NASA seriously or they were going to shelve it. And there was a lot of back and forth. For those that don't know, I think he was the commander or the pilot on the Dragon, the first Dragon mission, right? And
Not the first one, but
was
one
it
of the first ones that was about allowing individuals who I think got who paid to go on board
right?
to go up and do spacewalks out of a Dragon. So they had a special modification to the nose of the Dragon with a dome on it for observations, and they could do spacewalks out of it and so forth. So he commanded that mission.
Right, the Inspiration 4, right?
I believe that's
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
So um, part of that was, he checked the boxes, I think, for the Trump administration, which was he's a billionaire and he started almost like a competitor to the PayPal mafia, which curiously enough seems to be part of the stinging rebuke that his confirmation was from the Senate, anyways.
Yeah, and
But
I think there was a lot of pushback from Elon Musk that derailed it as well.
yeah,
So yeah, he was going to be confirmed earlier last year, and then all of a sudden, Trump pulled the rug out from under him. But now all of a sudden, he's been put back in and he's been confirmed.
yeah,
So that appears to be a good thing. He's been a little hazy on his plans again for lunar exploration in terms of some of the infrastructure and whatnot that we need to develop in order for Artemis to continue the way it's planned to. So we don't know if he supports all of that, like something called the Lunar Gateway, which is a space station that would be put in orbit around the moon that could be a point of departure from lunar orbit down to the surface and back again. We
mhm.
just don't know. He may not know for all I know right now. I
Yeah.
don't know.
I think, I mean, a lot of this, there's so many moving parts and so many physical and human factors available in this that up until somebody's given you 9 go-aheads and confirmations, just like one of the launches, you can't even get behind the technology until there's some level of like, okay, let's prove this, let's prove this, let's prove this.
Hmm.
The one of the upsides of the whole "Make America Great Again" thing, if there are any, is this is them kind of looking backwards. And in some of the areas they look backwards, clearly they're looking to the 1800s. But in the case of modern life, one of the things that people kind of mark as one of the greatest elements of America was our space exploration and our drive towards that, a shift away from, a nuclear race, a nuclear bomb race, to a more, technological and intellectual and philosophical race into space. Because, yeah, is there an element you can weaponize it? Yeah, sure. Is there a Space Force aspect of this? Yes, but not until you have well proven all the other, gotten all over all the other hurdles first. Even the maintenance of a space station, which we'll talk a minute about bringing the astronauts home. Did we ever recently? There was a health emergency aboard the space station, and they had to bring the astronauts home. I have yet to hear what it was. Have you?
No, no, I think there's medical privacy issues involved, and they don't classify it as an emergency, but there was a need to bring at least one of them back to do something for them. So we have not been told who it was out of the crew of four, and we don't
Yeah,
know what it was. Could have
and
been
they
a
all walked off there
tattoo for all
smiling.
we know.
Right? Yeah, exactly. We all saw them walk off when they landed and they brought them back. They were all smiling as if it was relatively minor. So maybe that was the reason. Maybe not. Maybe that
Yeah,
I mean, there's a myriad of other things that could have been the excuse. Who
yeah.
knows?
Well, we don't know. I mean, again, the privacy issues involved in terms of their discussions on this with the crew and the decision that was made to do it, we just don't know, and we may never know. I couldn't tell you.
Right. Yeah, and so let me see if I can find this picture of Jared Isaacson, Isaacman. Yeah,
Isaac
yeah,
Min,
Isaacman. Yeah, thank you. And
the
like,
amazing Isaac Min.
yeah, who basically could land. Whoops, that's not him at all. There he is. There he is. Who could basically like slow down, an orbiter with his ears. Um,
They are big ears, I got to
that
say.
it's yeah, yeah, yeah. That whole thing about like you've got one mouth and 2 ears, so you should listen twice as much or whatever. I think he's heard it all at this point. Um, but I will say that
I'll let you go there. I won't.
I will say that it was very reassuring because I couldn't tell, like, I mean, you can't tell what Musk is really thinking most of the time anyways, but it is curious that, like you were saying, that they have shut down or at least slowed the Mars approach for a moon focused approach, which is a very leaning away from Musk. The other one too is Blue Origin, is cresting into Blue Origin, which is Bezos's space system. We went down to when Summer and I were in Florida, we were in, we got a chance to like tour. We went down to the space center there, and there is an enormous Blue Origin facility there.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, it would have to be because I mean, look at the size of these things.
Yeah.
Obviously, but I do like the fact. I will say, say what you will about Bezos. The fact that they are naming him after Armstrong and Shepard and all these other guys. Is
Shepard
it
and Glenn.
Shepard and Glenn? That's right. That are like tipping their hat to the people who made it possible in a way that SpaceX did not.
Yeah, quite so. That new, it's literally called the New Glenn rocket. That heavy lifter that's reusable is quite a going concern, and that is something that's going to get into the news again later this year because they're going to fly something called the Blue Moon Mark 1 to the moon and land it on the moon. This is a cargo carrying vehicle that they're going to land there, which is going to end up being one way or another a part of the Artemis project in terms of supporting a crew in a lunar base. What's interesting about that, and I think I'm guessing is going to happen looking at the way things are developing on that side and not developing on the Starship side with Elon Musk, is that the Blue Moon Mark II, which is the larger version of this that can carry a crew, I have a feeling that's going to end up being our lander for Artemis when the time comes.
Mm-hmm.
There's a long road to walk down to get there to make that happen, but that's a going concern, the Mark II version of that vehicle. And it looks to me to be a whole lot more promising than the Starship option for a whole lot of reasons.
Right. Yeah, this is the Blue Moon lander variants, and this is taking the kind of reusable rocket aspect of what we're doing on Earth to the moon, and setting
Right.
up basically a station there or whatever. If the aliens will let us, I'm kidding. Or am I? Um,
I'm trying to think of what they were called in First Men in the Moon. They tell the I'm forgetting, was selenokites or whatever they were called. But
yeah,
anyway,
yeah, I think you're thinking of Cenobites from Hellraiser, but I'm kidding. I don't know if you watch Resident Alien. Have you watched
no,
that show
never
at all?
have.
It's a good time. It's real. It's lovely. Alan Tudyk is a genuinely decent human being. So like insofar as we know, I guess we always have to cop to that because whatever. But it's Hollywood after all. It's almost as bad as insurance brokers. Sometimes they seem nice, but there's a moon base plot. How do I give it away without not giving it away? Element of it at one point, and then but yeah. So this is the cargo transport part of that thing, and I guess this would be the sort of the demo version as well because by the time it gets a couple of years from now, I'm sure they're going to make it look as one of the benefits I think of the SpaceX system was this attempt to just go ahead and make it look like Star Trek. Part of since you can, if you're a billionaire and you're going to spend that money, you know, better to crash spectacularly and have a resilient craft than something that looks like it's made out of paper mache, which was always the NASA issue. They were always racing to just absolutely shoehorn, like the fact that NASA with a shoestring budget was able to accomplish what they did it will never be anything but extraordinary. And so I think this new era of near commercial use will hopefully lift it up to a potential for quicker development is all. Um,
Yeah, well, hopefully.
mhm.
Yeah, and you're right about the development timelines with NASA and how extraordinary that was back in the 1960s in particular. People think we spent sums of money from the federal budget on Apollo well beyond what we really spent. The reality is that at peak spending on Apollo, we were spending about a little less than 4% of the overall federal budget on everything that NASA did, including Apollo.
Hmm.
And that was back in the early and mid 60s when they're building all this infrastructure and they're building the Kennedy Space Center and all this other stuff and killing off the mosquitoes that lived there so people could actually walk around and not get bitten to death.
Right. Run
All of
off the
that.
alligators and boa constrictors. I think the boas came
Well,
later.
most of them.
Right. Right. Yeah. Um,
You still see gators out there, believe
yeah,
me,
you
walking
do.
around.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny that they can actually affect a launch. Still to this day. I will say, having been to both, I've been to Houston, I've been to the center there, I've been to Huntsville, and I've been to Kennedy, and they're all, I mean, so inspiring. Anyways, just if you're looking for if any one of those three is within a 1 hour flight of where you live in the United States, at some point check that off and go down there for the tour because parts of it are very 60s. If you go down to
Mm-hmm.
Huntsville, you're going to
Mm-hmm.
see, Werner von Braun's desk and all this kind of stuff and a mannequin version of him sitting behind the desk, just still because they're not spending any money on this tour at all. But the facilities that are there and what they've actually accomplished are just incredible. And by the way, this is for scale. This is a person, just so you know how big that thing is.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Yeah, so that's the Mark II version,
yes. Um,
the crude version.
so I guess from the standpoint of humans in space, humans moving forward, the ability for us to so I've always said that if humans have one purpose, if all we ever had as sentient primates, all this stuff that we've done, all the problems we've caused, every issue we've ever caused on Earth, but we're the one species that if there was an asteroid headed towards Earth that like a planet killer that would destroy the dinosaurs, we're the one species that could divert it. If all of our technology
Yeah,
just
we
built
are
up
the.
the one day where we go dink and knock that thing away so that all life on Earth continues for at least another 12 million years or whatever it is, it had been worth it, is my theory.
Yeah.
That's why space exploration, more than anything else, is planet defense. Uh oh, Carl. Do you have a question, Carl? Carl's an alien.
No, this is not a question mark. This is
Uh,
actually a
uh,
tabby tail.
yeah, as it should be, or it's some sort of poisonous snake that has modified itself. Carl is part alien. But I feel like that's our reasoning. That is our, that if humanity had a single raison d'etre, it could very well just be that. We're the ones that could divert an entire, a planet killer. We're the only ones who do it. I love dolphins. I think they're smarter than us on so many levels because if you could just, I guess, whatever.
Hello.
Yep, there you go. What do dolphins do? Swim, play with other fish, masturbate all day. Then I suppose that's a very high level of living. But they're
I'm
never.
glad you're watching the right science specials on TV,
Yes,
Hal, and spending
absolutely.
time watching masturbating dolphins.
Well, I feel like any kind of bridge we can make with another species is always good. Apes get drunk and start wars. So, we share a lot with the animal kingdom, much more than I think people are willing to recognize. But one thing that we can do is build structures that take us to space. And I think if there's one, I keep looking for bright spots in the irony of this particular administration, if we can just get through it. And part of it is that it is almost entirely put to bed the Republican objections to NASA. The other one, of course, is that, ironically enough, RFK, with all of his vaccine nonsense, is the one that's sort of removing processed foods and stuff. We're going to talk about that in the second hour. Um, and some of the updates that are happening there, things that Democrats have been fighting for a long time, but it wasn't the only obstruction came from Republicans. So it had to be a Republican president that got it through. And certainly a cult leader type was the only one that could bully it through, even if he's not aware of what he's doing. I think the leashes are clearly being held in all technological stuff by people around him who see either dollar signs or their name on a plaque. And,
Well, let's face it. I mean, when it comes to science, they don't really know what they're doing.
no.
I think they're willing to fund things that they think will generate jobs in their states and districts, which is a large part of and
Yep.
always has been for funding NASA. But otherwise, I mean, this is living under this administration, as we know, is a little bit like, playing Jeopardy, where the answers on the board were written by 3-year-olds that have lead poisoning. I mean,
Right. And there's a gun to your head while you're answering the questions.
exactly, yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it really is loaded, and it really will go off unless you give the right answer, which is going to be anything that pleases Donald Trump at that
Right.
moment and flatters him.
Well,
And then
that's
you have
it.
to give him the gun.
There's this great line in I think it's in Endgame in the Avengers movie where Ant-Man is saying to Black Widow and Captain America, he goes, "You know anything about quantum physics?" And she says, "Only enough to make conversation." And the reason she says that is because she's a spy. She uses baseline information of all over lots of topics to get close to people so she can kill them. Is the underlying conversation that's happening there, right? But there is something to people whose egos rely on people thinking that they're smart, accidentally doing more smart things than people who are genuinely smart. Because I mean, unrealized genius is the tragedy of human existence. People who are so smart they talk themselves out of taking a risk, for example. And NASA is a giant risk. It is a constant and never-ending risk, and everyone who's involved in it is aware of it. Every astronaut knows that what happened to Challenger could happen to them, and that is an acceptable amount of dangerous adventurism is so unique in government
Yeah.
and industry.
One adjective I would apply to risk in terms of NASA is the adjective managed. It's managed
Sure.
risk, and the way that,
Yes.
if you look at NASA's history from the onset, that the development of their technology and the way that the missions were planned and executed, all of this is a step-by-step process of careful testing over and over again on the ground before you ever fly it. And then when you fly it, that becomes another test on top of all the ones you did on the ground. And
Right.
believe me, now, I'm writing a book right now on the development of the Apollo lunar module. When you look into this stuff and how this was done, it is just astonishing, the
Mhm.
amount of these different private entities that were involved, that were working under NASA and working together as contractors and subcontractors, how they developed solutions to all kinds of problems that in turn would mesh appropriately with the other solutions developed by other contractors,
Mhm.
and how they made it work together. And so you had, failure rates that were very low by the time you would end up flying.
Mhm.
Now, that's, of course, very different from what goes on with SpaceX. They like to fly and test until destruction. They fly, they blow up one of their starships, and they go, okay, let's see what we learned from that. And they learn
Yep.
from something, and they try again, and they just keep doing it. Um, it's a very different approach. And I think at the
Mhm.
core of it, Starship is such a quantum leap forward, and so many different technologies you're trying to do with a crew on board ultimately, that I fret constantly over ever flying anybody on that thing, much less landing them successfully on the moon or Mars, or even back on Earth on any kind of a landing platform at all. You have to do everything perfectly, or you have complete destruction of the vehicle and the loss of the crew, who
Mhm.
has no way out of that starship at any point during launch, during reentry, during landing. It all works or they're dead.
Right.
And that bothers me a lot, frankly. I
Mhm.
think we should have learned a lot of lessons from things like the space shuttle that didn't have a launch escape system on it, because they thought, well, this is more or less like an airliner. We don't have launch escape systems on an airliner because
Mhm.
that's not practical for everybody that flies on it. So we didn't
Mhm.
have that.
Well, but we do have one, for example, in Air Force One. There is as we learned from, Escape from New York, there is a safety pod that can fall to Earth and all that kind of stuff with the president, and if something terrible happens. And the reason you don't do it on an airliner is because there are too many people, and so the risk benefit analysis in this is what 4 people are you going to save? But in the case of the shuttle, if the command module, if you've got a crew of 4 and they can all fit in the command module, the front of the actual craft, and it could have been jettisoned or it was sealed in a way that could have survived a good portion of the explosion. There is whether you had a cap system inside it like you have on a Cirrus, I believe it is, aircraft, where concussive blasts cause a parachute to come after a certain amount of time so that it clears whatever the explosion is, or whether the plane's going down, you can actually pull it, and it will pull the cab out, and and it'll fall to the ground like a crate. That kind of thing, and it's one of the reasons why the astronaut capsules were better in that regard over time, anyways, I suppose, because I guess I don't know that they were built to be jettisoned, but everybody was in this block, that was different in its construction from the rest of the cylinder that they were sitting on, as opposed to the entire, all of the shuttle was basically the same block, the same thing. There was no, like crunch zones on an F1 race car, which I lovingly, by the way, I've only gotten into F1 for a couple of reasons. One, Kamala Harris said she was into it last year, and I was like, or year before last, and I was shocked to find this out that she and Doug watched it or whatever. I was like, that's fascinating to me. And the F1 movie was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed it quite thoroughly. But I call it NASA car. The more you learn about it, it seems like they have turned, like aerodynamics into a sport simply so we can learn everything about aerodynamics. Like all the data that you're collecting from F1 cars, if you were to crunch that in an AI, you would be able to create, a form factor on almost everything that deals with wind on Earth, whether it's hurricane wind or whether it's a spacecraft. And I feel like that's also, the F-111, the F-11, 111 ejection system. Yeah, exactly. And
yeah, there are a couple other Air Force planes that did have them.
Yeah. So I feel like that should always be part of our goal as humans, because you don't also know what you're going to learn along the way. The F1, I bring up the F1 thing because there was this really fascinating story I heard recently about how there was this children's hospital where they were doing heart repair on children. And because children's bodies are so small and their systems are so delicate compared to their sort of robust, mature nature of a human chest cavity, that somewhere in the kids were going to die anyways if they didn't operate, but somewhere in the order of like 60% of them didn't make it off the operating table. They died in the process. And it wasn't because the heart failed or whatever. It was because it was so complicated and the surgery took so long that they just couldn't hold out. And so somebody had the idea to bring in an F1 team, the pit crew. They brought in an F1 pit crew who basically change all the tires and pieces of the vehicle in seconds. In 2.9 seconds, they can take the nose off and replace the tires and pop a new one on, and the car is driving in 2.9 seconds. And so they brought them into this emergency room, and they had them observe multiple operations and take notes. And the F1 people were like, okay, you guys are wasting so much time. Right? That's just the reality. You are wasting so much time. And in wasting that time, you're costing these kids their lives. Everybody's stepping over everybody. You're calling audibles on stuff that happen every time. You're talking to each other about stuff that happens in cycle. You're doing this. And I feel like a lot of what F1 learned about that and where that came from, why it went from, NASCAR to IndyCar to F1 ultimately, was similar to the NASA situation, where they went, we've got to button down all these possibilities. We got to make do. And sometimes, like in Apollo, we have to solve a problem from, hundreds of thousands of miles away, if not millions, I suppose. At some point, we're going to have to talk you through how to fix it when you can't even go outside to fix the thing that's on the outside. And that, just knowing that that's a possibility, is so inspiring, because from that you could actually take NASA teams who've worked on that and go, hey guys, we're trying to figure out healthcare. We're trying to figure out, these bigger systems and how to refine them down to where they're perfect, and any variable is something we can fix. That's why I like Mark Kelly. I clearly think Mark Kelly is going to run for president in 2028. I think he'd make a fantastic VP followed by president if it's him and Newsom or vice versa, right?
Hmm.
He's definitely a good dude. But one of the things I love most about him is that as an astronaut, he's had to deal with a severity of circumstance that I think a few people can process in an environment where everything could go wrong in a second, and you have to know your entire
Hmm.
every your job and everyone else's job, and the ship, and the physics, and the environmental concerns all at once. And I feel like NASA is that's why it's so inspiring
Yeah.
as an organization.
And yeah, NASA's always been quite good about that, and they've had to employ that sort of rapid "do this now or else," and then
Mm-hmm.
save the whole mission by doing it.
Failure is not an
Um,
option, right?
yeah, I mean, which is an invented line for the movie, but anyway, yeah, it's a great
Mm-hmm.
line. But anyhow, I mean, things like
So is, by the way,
uh,
just follow the money. That was made up as
just
well.
follow, yeah,
That's
that's
yep.
Bill Goldman's line, who wrote the
That's right.
screenplay, "Just
That's
follow
right.
the money." So, the process of doing things in a hurry, when you there are a couple phases in any mission where things can go wrong really, really fast. And that's always a launch, for
Mm-hmm.
instance. That's why so much of it is automated. They knew even way back to the first Mercury flights, you're going to have to automate a great deal of this. And the
Mm-hmm.
pilots are saying, really? Yeah,
Yeah.
really. They're
Yes.
doing things like an abort that may have to happen. There has to be sensors on board that can go through a processor that can signal separation of the capsule and firing off the escape rocket and getting out of there before you could ever do anything about it. Also, things like a lunar landing, where you
Mm-hmm.
might remember on Apollo 11, they had two major problems that surfaced for them that happened really fast, and they had to make callbacks to
Mm-hmm.
Houston to be able to get advice on interpreting what they're seeing and what to do about it. The
That's
famous
right.
1201 and 1202 alarms that kept flashing on their display and keyboard inside the lunar module. And Neil's going, give us a reading on the 1202. And they would go to the back room. And I don't know if you saw this on your tour in Houston. They have these different rooms, like mission evaluation
Mm-hmm.
rooms and so forth, where the contractors sit. And they're just sitting there keyed and waiting for something to go wrong with their system.
Yeah.
And so you get this call back that the computer is flashing this alarm code. And most people don't know what in the hell it means. They don't know
Mm-hmm.
what these 1201 and 1202s are, but basically it means the computer is restarting because it is overloaded with all kinds of interrupts coming in,
Mm-hmm.
which is a long story.
Yeah.
And basically what the callback was is that we're go on that alarm. Okay, we're go on that alarm, just ignore it. And if they had not been prepared for that, and the backstory on that is sometime before that, they had gone through simulations with the crew where they were looking at some of these alarms that could come up and people didn't know what they meant. And so Gene Kranz, who you remember from Apollo
Mm-hmm.
13, sits down with all the people that are getting ready to fly on Apollo 11, all his mission controllers, and he starts talking to the person that's responsible for evaluating what can come back from the computer in terms of codes that can go wrong. And he said, I want you to go in and write down every possible alarm code you might get and what it means.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, I don't really have time to do that. And Gene basically said, make time,
Mm-hmm.
do it. And
Mm-hmm.
so they did. And he actually had a cheat card that he wrote out in hand underneath the plexiglass on his desk. 1201 means this, 1202 means that, and on and on and on. So when the call came back that they were getting these codes, they knew what the implications were and they knew they could continue because the computer would be able to essentially restart and process things that were of a higher priority and continue to allow the landing
Mm-hmm.
to occur. So that's one case again where you have this rapid but prepared for decision making and action taking that was correct
Right.
rather than aborting the mission or getting the crew killed, God forbid.
And in doing that, that set a standard going forward for how things are operated. Somebody wrote in the chat room, like, regulations are written in blood earlier in the chat. And in many ways, that is very true. I used to have a joke in my act for years about why just getting rid of regulations is stupid because we didn't used to have it. obviously at some point we needed it. And the way you know this is if you buy a microwave, when you get a microwave and it has the manual, there will invariably be an extra sheet of paper stuffed into it at the factory, which is like a last minute addition to the manual. And it was one of them was um, you know uh, you know basically those Jiffy Pop popcorn things. It was like, do not put those in the microwave because they're made out of metal, and most people don't realize that. They just think, oh, the order. So until popcorn was put in a bag, which is how they made the shift, some people would throw that in and go like, I can just heat it up like that, and boom, right? It would fritz the thing out. And the basic idea, the joke is that some annoying young man gets a microwave for his mom because she's afraid she's going to leave the oven on. So he's like, get her this nice new contraption, and you can cook in this. You can heat your tea in it. It's got a button that says tea and all that kind of stuff, and you just put it in there. Works. And she's like, I don't know how to work this contraption. He's like, it's just like an oven, Mom. And then he just leaves. And unfortunately, her dog's name was Popcorn, and she used to dry her dog after he got wet in the oven. So the point being is that regulations have come up for a reason, and oftentimes when you get rid of a regulation, you're really just updating it. It's either out of it's unnecessary because the technology has advanced in such a way that it commonly can't be harmed in this way, or it won't let itself. Like some modern microwaves, if it senses metal and it senses the heat building, it will just shut down. It'll just stop, right? Once that happens, then you can take that out. The other one is that there are bigger fish to fry. That we've changed what's in water, we've changed what's in food in some cases, and so the thing we were warning you about is gone, but there's something else in there. And so when they would update these things, like here's your current list of error codes, bang, and you should have that. I feel like in governance, one of the things that we could take away from NASA and use what they're so good at in the same way that the surgeons use those F1 pit crews is to go, okay, you guys, retired NASA guys, you guys solve system problems, engineering problems all the time. Let's have a round table where we give you a problem and we want you to fix it like you would fix that problem and suggest to everybody, an alternate possibility. We've got some questions though.
Okay. I'm just going to give Ariel her insulin shot at 10 o'clock here, and no problem. It just takes me a couple seconds. So go ahead while I'm doing that.
No, I'm kidding. Yeah. One is, I think a fairly easy one. Is NASA back in the space race? And I think we are the space race right now. I mean, we're it. I have to say, the Chinese space system, like their own version, has been totally overblown. And in the Martian, one of the things that made me roll my eyes was like, this is how you know some of the funding for the film came from China, is that they've got this backup super secret, really awesome rocket they just aren't using yet, right? And they don't. They don't. Like
not likely.
a lot of countries can put near Earth orbit satellites up, and some of them can even put up regular satellites. But in terms of the space race, human beings doing stuff in space, America's kind of the only game on Earth really right now.
Yeah, I mean, this is really, when you look at it globally,
Hmm.
we're in a renaissance period for space exploration. The
Yes.
amount of launches that are going on, not only in America, but from Europe using the Ariane booster, China with their Long March rockets. They had one blow up the other day, and then I think on the same day they had a solid fuel rocket also fail to get into space, which blew up. But they're working on these larger ones called the Long March 12 series that are going to, ideally for them, enable them to get to the lunar surface eventually, and they hope to do it before we do. I don't know what the next version is going to be, if they're going to have another version of rocket called the Cultural Revolution. I have no idea, but these are called Long March.
Right.
So yeah, there's a huge amount of activity from private corporations flying out of everywhere from Europe to New Zealand, spaceports that are being created,
There's one being built here in
where
Las Vegas.
yeah, it's a good place for it. You've got nice weather out there. It's kind of like at Edwards Air Force Base, which is not
The
that far away from
the
Vegas,
ground is
really.
very stable, which is a big part of
Hmm.
it. There's no
Interestingly enough,
yeah.
here's what we're talking about desert environments. One of the things that's going to fly on this version of Artemis
Hmm.
is a laser optical communication system that they're going to have on this spacecraft uh, with people on it for the first time. And they've been flying these experimentally on satellites for a while, but this laser optical system will allow them to communicate with a narrowly focused beam from a gimbal telescope on the spacecraft back to one of two places on Earth, one of them being a desert in California, the other one being in New Mexico, where you have
Hmm.
cloudless skies more often than not, and can let you transmit at about 260 megabits per second. So they're going to
Hmm.
be trying that out as opposed to full time radio
High speed
communication on
moon
this flight.
internet, so they can stream Netflix up there. This is the
They'll be
James Webb.
streaming 4K video from there.
Yeah.
4K video.
This is the James Webb telescope, which replaced the Hubble. Andrea asked, "Are we still exploring with the Hubble?"
Yeah,
Um,
Hubble's still
yeah,
very much active up there. It's still working.
yep. But Webb is the new big upgrade that's getting the ultra fine images or whatever. It's the next upgrade. And by the way, there'll be something even better than it one day. The idea is that they want to eventually set up a similar thing on the moon itself, because if you could set
Hmm.
a telescope there, the size of it is no longer constrained by keeping it in orbit and all that kind of stuff. The other thing too is I got a question from Facebook, which is, what does Carl think about having Musk and Bezos and entering the space realm and their entrance into the space realm? And then we're at the top of the hour, so I'll let you go after that.
Um, yeah. Well, I think Elon Musk is a psychopath. Okay, so
Yeah,
I'll leave it
yeah,
at that.
agreed. Yeah, right.
Um,
Check. Yeah.
but this is, I mean, what we're seeing is an outgrowth of something again that's gone on throughout the country's history when it comes to forging new technologies and forging new pathways into parts of the continent, the oceans, the skies, and eventually, of course, space, which is that we fund and give direction to private companies to build things for us for a program. For Apollo, North American builds all
Hmm.
this stuff like the second stage of the Saturn V and the command service module, and Grumman built the lunar module. But eventually, these companies are going to find it feasible and uh, profitable
Hmm.
in a way that makes sense to
Right.
forge out on their own. And this is just an inevitable thing, just like it was in the realm of shipping, in the realm of operating canals, railroads, etc. So, yeah, it's inevitable and ultimately it's a good thing. But the exploration stuff, I mean, the really spearheaded stuff, that's still, I think, going to end up being for the time being in NASA's domain because it's
Right.
not profit centered, right? You're not there to make a buck. You're there to be able to see what you can do.
Hmm. But in each of these, because of the ancillary inventions and the other stuff, technology wise, that can come from being in this process, having a public-private partnership, as they're often called, in these areas, is very normal. In the same way that we would do this with like a lot of universities, especially the ones that have the high level, space and science um, programs, are for-profit colleges, and they attract
Hmm.
a certain student constituency because of that very thing, because they can afford to pay for really high level professors, and you can, I guess, rub elbows with other rich kids there, and that's the two reasons you go. And so we've done this with these schools. There's not all that much difference between the profit making nature of say Northrop Grumman and say the Harvard fund. And ultimately, it is technically to grow the thing, technically to pay for alumni type of stuff, and in the same way that you would pay, dividends to a stockholder. In some ways, it's a very slippery slope between the two of these, I think. the question, becomes at some point: do you only relegate yourself to the science and technology available to you, the people that would come to work for you, that you can afford to pay a government salary directly? And if you did that,
Mm.
we wouldn't have an aerospace program. We wouldn't have the FAA. If every airplane that flew was a government plane, for example, or built by a government entity in just regular airplanes, we would not
Hmm.
have commercial airline travel for the average person. You'd have a
Yeah,
bunch of rich
absolutely
people
not.
with planes flying around, and there'd be a totally different radar system just for the upper 1%. There isn't. There's that parallel, that operating in parallel, and being able to turn whatever inventions or any kind of advances that you make as a company into something that is commercially useful for everybody else on the planet, has always been a value added aspect of this. Bezos is talking about data centers in space because you don't have to worry about cooling them. And if you're talking about like a laser, transmission system for information, that's one of the ways you do it. You have permanent internet the world over that nobody can shut off, available to you, if you have these data centers in space that never overheat and don't require a ton of energy, because cooling them is almost as much of a power drag as running them
Sure.
at a certain point.
Yeah, I
So,
think I don't know much about that, to be honest with you, but I do know a little bit about the technology of keeping electronics cool in space. And what they do for that is not to use a radiator in the sense that we use it on like a car, where you're
mhm,
you're transferring the heat into the air, right, from the radiator. There is no air in space, so what you have are sublimators to do
right.
that. So you transfer the heat into porous plates that ooze out the water from microscopic pores. It forms ice because it's a vacuum and you
Mhm,
don't have liquid water in a vacuum. And that ice, when it's exposed to sunlight, melts off into steam. It actually sublimates directly from ice to steam. It
mhm.
bypasses liquid water and it carries the heat away. So it's done that way.
How did you do it? I can't tell you, but I can tell you that it's very dangerous and highly unstable. It's a real genius. I will take a moment to quote real genius anytime I want, because
I
uh,
was
he,
wondering, I haven't seen that one.
you must. Tomorrow, it's in your, it's now your, it's assigned viewing. Val Kilmer is in it, and he's fantastic, and it's his
Okay.
debut. Secondly, it's about basically a bunch of kids at Caltech who are working on a laser system,
Hmm.
and part of it has to do with like government contractors and that kind of stuff. That said, thank you, Carl, for being on.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
I would love to have, they keep scrubbing them. Otherwise, I would say we need to have a launch show. We'll just keep in mind. But I think once it launches, we can have an orbit show or something like that. Would be
Yeah,
kind of
or a
cool.
splashdown show. I mean,
Yeah,
once you get the flight going, a lot of things become much more certain in terms of scheduling. So,
exactly, exactly. So thanks for being on, and I look forward to seeing you very soon at our next meal, post or pre flappers meal.
me too. I missed those over the
Eh,
last few months, but I know they're going to resume. So I look forward to it, and we'll get
yeah.
down to Burbank down there. I used to go to that Fuddruckers, by the way, too, because
Oh.
my company that I worked for at the time had a training center in the Dick Clark building.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah, so we would go to Fuddruckers a
The
lot for
building that
lunch.
never ages. All right, just kidding. Uh,
Exactly. It has a portrait somewhere in a basement and it makes
right.
sure that it doesn't age.
That's right. Thank you so much, Carl. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And there he goes, ladies and gentlemen. Carl Alessi joining us this morning for an illuminating and exciting conversation. I hope for you as much as it was for me about space and the like. And give it up for Carl in the chat room when you see him in there, and to all of his cats and his lovely wife Joyce.